The Mill Owner's Daughter.
Chapter 3. Mary Upton smiled as she heard the rumbling metallic sound of iron-shod wheels and the ring of ponies' hoofs on the yard cobbles. Next moment, Irene Rose appeared in the doorway of her cottage, young Daniel in tow, a big grin on his face. "Morning, Miss Rose. Sit this cell down." Daniel made his way over to Clara Chadwick's daughter, Emma, and sat cross-legged on the old flock rug in front of the fireplace with her. Both the same age, give or take a couple of weeks, they were great friends. Jonathan, Emma's 6-year-old brother, smiled, said hello, and immediately returned his attention to Rebecca and Rachel, Charlotte Beswick's twins. "Can I help with anything, Mary?" "No fret, Miss Rose, I'll be in a bit a minute. I've just finished packing up after operative's breakfast. There's nearly mass tea in pot. Help thyself." With that she disappeared into her living room, and Rose heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. Mary was obviously searching for something. At that moment the door opened. A dark-haired young girl appeared, no more than 10 years of age, holding a young boy, maybe 3 or 4, firmly by the hand. "Hello," Irene Rose said. "Who do we have here?" "Is a Mary Upton in?" the visitor asked breathlessly. "She won't be a moment. Come in, sit down and have a cup of tea with me." "I need a Mary urgent. Rose is in labour. She in greater pain." Irene Rose was on her feet and across the room mid-seconds. "Mary, Mary, quick, you're needed." "Whatever's matter?" She spotted a visitor, looking agitated. "Ah, Bella, is Rose a-needing me?" The Italian girl nodded her head. "Rose hurt him very much, Mary." "Have you put water on to boil like I told you? See, Mary, and I have a cleaner rags. Right, let me be getting me bag and we'll be off. Take the pony and trap, Mary. Tell James it's urgent. I'll look after the children." Irene Rose turned to Bella's small charge. "My name's Rose," she said, her voice gentle. "Would you like to tell me yours? And then I can introduce you to the other children. They all want to be friends with you." The boy held on to his sister's hand all the more firmly and moved halfway behind her, peering around her hip at Irene Rose with big brown eyes, seemingly not sure how to react to the strange English lady with her bright blue eyes and pretty face, framed by fair hair with ringlets. "There's no need to be shy, little one. You're amongst friends," Irene Rose coaxed. "Come on, Giovanni," Bella exclaimed. "Say hello to the young lady. She'll not bite you." She walked over, pulling her unsure charge with her. "Giovanni's very shy, miss." Irene Rose shook her head with a grin and decided to call in the experts, the ability to delegate being one of her many qualities. "Daniel, Emma, come over here." The 2 4-year-olds stood up. "Say hello to Giovanni. He's come to play." They took the boy by the hand. Within moments they were playing together as if lifelong friends. Bella laughed. "Thank her goodness," she said simply. Mary entered the kitchen with her bag, now firmly in midwife role. "I'll leave you in charge here, Rose. Tom Jenkinson, Esther and Amy will be back soon with fresh victuals to prepare for the mill workers' midday break," she said briskly. "Come on, young Bella, me love. Let's be sorting Rosa out and bring a new babby safe into the world." Thus Irene Rose's plans to take the children for a picnic evaporated into thin air. She opened her purse, pulled out a leather-bound novel, and settled down to read, wondering what further excitement might lie in store. Events that August Monday morning seemed to conspire, challenging Matthew Etherow's belief that a move to reduce the mill operatives' wages would come to a head the next year. Michael O'Donnell had barely reached the small office above Polly's millinery shop in Oldham Street he shared with Daniel Donovan, an official of the Powerloom Overlookers Association and a member of the General Council of the National Charter Association, when 2 delegates, George Hadfield and William Doyle, walked in. They informed them the superintendents of 3 Droylsden mills had placed notices at all the work entrances announcing a 10% cut in wages to take effect immediately due to unfavourable trading conditions on the continents of Europe and North America. Droylsden, a market town with spinning and weaving mills, wasn't noted as a stronghold of trade unionism. Despite this, the workers at New Mill, which bordered on Openshaw, a growing engineering centre, where union organisation was developing fast, had immediately organised a turnout and had pickets in place to prevent finished goods leaving the mill and potential strike breakers, or knobsticks as they were known, entering. Mill hands at the other two mills were planning evening meetings and working normally in the meantime, a sure sign of weakness. George Hadfield urged Michael to attend and speak out, although William Doyle warned few of the workers were members of a union in either mill, and they'd have their work cut out to persuade them to resist the wage reductions. Michael indicated he'd gladly attend and address the meetings, providing he was allowed to do so, and that he'd involve Daniel Donovan. He liked nothing better than a challenge, and long experience had taught him the most hostile meetings were often the ones where the best converts were made. In a room full of enemies you can only make friends, being his own slant on the old Irish proverb that a stranger is merely a friend you've yet to meet. He questioned both delegates carefully, and they informed him there seemed to be some coordination between the managers of the three mills, the clearest sign being that all the printed notices were identical. This intrigued Michael. Coordination wasn't unusual, and, in view of Matthew's arguments the previous day, was to be expected. The fact only 3 mills were involved puzzled him. 2 questions immediately arose in his mind. Did this mean the owners of the 3 mills were mavericks, acting without the support of other Droylsden manufacturers? Or was it merely an initial attempt to test the strength of union organisation and the willingness of workers to defend their wages, with more trouble to follow? Later that day, Michael was about to leave the office with Daniel Donovan with the intention of having lunch at Mary's kitchen, when another delegate burst into the office, this time a collier's representative, Richard Rogers from Clayton, a township bordering Droylsden and Manchester. "You look flushed, Richard," Donovan remarked. "Where's the fire?" "I'm on my way to union office. I've been tipped off by one of Pitt's supervisors. Mill owners are seeking cuts in price of coal, and that could only end in wage cuts if mine owners concede. I thought it might be something you should be made aware of." "Have you time to eat with us, Richard?" "No, I must be off. I'll catch thee later, maybe." "The plot thickens, Dan," Michael said. "Let's be off to Mary's. We need to talk, am I thinking?" Irene Rose had enjoyed a busy morning standing in for Mary Upton. The berth was obviously a difficult one, the time coming up to 12:30, and she still hadn't returned. The co-op staff consisted of Amy Redbank and Anna Sutcliffe, who worked in the kitchen with Mary, together with Esther Radcliffe and Susan Openshaw, who waited on and served in the shop. Additionally, they enjoyed the services of Tom Jenkinson, a power loom weaver unable to obtain work at his trade because of his trade union work. Tom organised the marketing in conjunction with Mary and did most of the heavy work, fetching and carrying. When they'd first discussed the formation of the enterprise, the idea had been to organise the tea and dining rooms as a workers' co-op and the shop side of the business as a consumer co-op under its own management. In the end, they decided to simplify the structure, bringing both sides of the business under the umbrella of the workers' co-op. This had worked well. They didn't have to duplicate labour, all were trained to perform each other's jobs, and the customers for both sides of the business tended to be the same people. The operatives from mills in the vicinity would drop in for a meal, whether it be for breakfast, dinner or tea, and place orders for any fresh vegetables, bacon, cheese or other provisions they required, which they then picked up on their way home from the mill. The premises were used in the evening for trade union meetings, socials and educational events. Plans were now underway to expand Mary's nursery, with a worker financed by the co-op. They based their wages on those of the spinners at Gibraltar Mill, by far the best paying mill in Manchester. However, the co-op paid the adult rate from the age of 16 instead of 18. In most mills it was 21. Elected as overall manager, Mary received the same wage as the rest of the adults at her own insistence, although the co-op rules allowed for a small differential. The others claimed she deserved extra for the responsibility. Mary refused to accept this argument, her position being that each worker was as important as the rest, because the co-op couldn't function if any single job wasn't carried out. As each worker was dependent on the others, each should be valued the same. End of argument. At the same time, she pointed out to them that as joint owners of the co-op, They were all equally financially responsible for any commitments the enterprise undertook, and therefore all had a common duty to work to their best ability. She applied similar reasoning to the question of men's wages, arguing they should not be penalised for an accident of birth, and should be treated the same as the women. The co-op workers met every Tuesday evening to discuss the running of the business, and held a special meeting once a month to discuss finance and longer-term plans. Irene Rose, who'd organised the initial capital to set up the enterprise, and whose idea it had been, had permission to attend any of the meetings, and her opinions were actively sought, although she had no vote as she wasn't an employee. Additionally, Irene Rose organised education classes for the workers, and even the youngest, Susan Openshaw, who had just turned 15, could read and write with expertise. True, Esther Radcliffe's writing was a bit wobbly, her right hand having been injured when working in McConnell's mill, but she was an avid reader. She was also a keen amateur botanist, as well as an accomplished watercolourist, another talent Irene Rose encouraged. All customers of the co-op were entitled to receive an annual dividend on their total purchases, each receiving a membership card on which the cost of all their purchases was recorded. They guaranteed a minimum of 2%, but over the last 2 years the amount paid had been 2 shillings in the pound, 10%. Whilst this wasn't a tremendous amount, it was appreciated by its recipients, who also knew they were purchasing good quality, unadulterated food at highly competitive prices, a luxury not available to most working people. When Michael O'Donnell and Daniel Donovan entered the yard, the place was heaving, every table and seat taken. Michael knocked on the cottage door and entered the kitchen. Irene Rose, caught in the process of lifting a large pan of bubbling cowle stew off the stove, met her husband's gaze. "Help me with this, Michael. I'm rushed off my feet." He took the vessel off her, pausing only to give her an affectionate peck on the forehead, and placed it on the kitchen table, where Anna and Amy were busy ladling the contents of another pan into bowls. "That smells good," Daniel Donovan said, wrinkling his nose. "I'll be having some of that." Irene Rose laughed, but then put the union organiser firmly in his place. "You can wait your turn, Dan. I've hungry workers to feed first." She turned to her husband. "Could you check on the children in the living room, Michael? Mary's attending a difficult birth." "Aye, Rose. Come on, Dan. Let's see how good you are at playing uncle." "Ta, Bella, you're a gradely lass. I needed that." The midwife put her cup down. "Is Rosa comfortable?" "I think I saw Mary. Shall I check?" "No, love, don't be fretting thyself. I'll go up in a minute. She needs rest. It were a difficult birth. Lass'll be worn out." "Is having a bambina always that hard, Mary? Rosa were hurting so badly. I was so frightened for her." Mary smiled at the youngster. "It's supposed to get easier more you have, but 'twere a breach. Babby were lying in a bad position." "I no want her, Babby," Bella said quietly. She looked at Mary with big brown eyes and smiled shyly. "I think I'd best stay virgin. Maybe be a nun." "Time will tell," Mary responded. "Anyways, you need to stay here and look after Rosa. I'll bring Giovanni home later." "No, Mary. Francesca's going to collect him on the way home from Nelson Mill." Mary nodded. Francesca was the eldest of Rosa's 3 daughters, Bella being the youngest. Rosa's new baby was a boy. Giovanni's position as the only male child, and the attention that naturally accompanied it, had suddenly changed. "Here I am, safe and sound." "Sit down, Mary. There's fresh tea in the pot, and plenty of stew left if you want it. You look worn out. Is it a boy or a girl?" "A little boy, Miss Rose. Giovanni's getting a brother, but to a touch and go. I thought I'd lost mother and Babby at one point." "Is James still outside?" Mary nodded as she poured herself a cup of tea. Irene Rose retreated outside, returning with the coachman. She bid him sit down and went to the stove. "Get that down you. You look as though you both need nourishment," she said, placing one bowl in front of Mary and one in front of James. She smiled to herself as her father's coachman wielded his spoon. He attacked the stew as if he hadn't taken food for a week. "You can have the rest of the afternoon off, James. I'm accompanying my husband to a Droylsden mill later. Michael can handle the pony and trap, as long as you don't mind making your own way to Hardwick." James's spoon came to a halt halfway between bowl and mouth. "Nay, I don't mind driving you, Miss Rose. We won't be leaving here until late. We don't have to be there until the mills finish at 8:30. You might as well relax at home." "Nay, miss, I'll drive you. Anyhow," he said, a grin appearing along with a twinkle in his rheumy old eyes, "it'll save me ears from getting usual nightly battering from our Martha." "Come on, Susie, you're slow to eat. Let's be having you. Giddy up, old girl." James Black had grumbled and coaxed, whistled and hoped at the pony all the way from Mary Upton's, through Bessick and Clayton. Now they'd reached the outskirts of Droylsden, and still the pony ambled along at little more than a slow trot. Irene Rose, Michael O'Donnell and Daniel Donovan huddled together on the platform seat of the trap for warmth, trying their best to contain their mirth, and not always succeeding. The evening had turned chilly. At last they reached Medlock Mill. Here they dropped Daniel Donovan off, leaving him in the capable hands of George Hadfield to address the power-loom weavers and other mill hands. They continued on their way, and moments later pulled up on the edge of a small cobbled square, on one side of which towered Lomas Mill. William Doyle sat at a wooden table outside a public house, named the Little Doffers Arms. The pub occupied the opposite side of the square from the mill. He looked across, his attention attracted by the sound of the pony's hoofs and the rattle of harness as the trap came to a halt. He watched, wondering who the fine lady was in the long black dress and white wool shawl, being assisted onto the road by Michael O'Donnell. He rose from his seat and walked towards them. "Michael, you're early and is still in the mill." "I didn't want to be late, Bill. This is my wife, Irene Rose. Rose, this is my good friend, William Doyle. He's a Chartist lecturer." Irene Rose smiled. The title Chartist lecturer was normally associated with men whose activities in support of the Charter had resulted in the employers blacklisting them. The exercise of free speech in the manufacturing districts all too often bore a heavy price for working men. She held out her hand. "Please call me Rose, William." "That's kind of you, ma'am. Call me Bill." They shook hands, but their conversation went no further. The sound of the miller hooter, signalling the end of the working day, interrupted them. Within minutes, scores of workers were spilling out of the mill gates into the square, the vast majority women and children, although a young lad with distinctive bright ginger hair led the way. "Now then, Michael, see yon red-headed lad out in front? He's one of us. Let's be getting out at front at pub. They can use table as us in." The redhead made it to the front of the pub at the same time as them. "Halloa, Bill, I'll be getting meeting t'order." He grinned at Michael, his cheerful face a mass of freckles. "You may not remember me, but you convinced me to be a Chartist. My name's Albert Ashton." Without more ado, he jumped up onto the bench seat and from there onto the table, as supple as a weasel. He held his hands up to attract his fellow workers' attention, not that he had to, as they were already assembling in front of the pub in a great arc. Irene Rose immediately noticed men completely dominated the front row, and, judging by their clothes, they weren't all operatives. Behind them, ranks of shawled women and children, the latter mainly girls, were slowly assembling. She guessed nearly all were spinners and carders, or, in the case of the youngsters, scavengers, doffers and piecers. Most sported lint and cotton dust in their hair. Still more women hurried to join them, many with babes in their arms. As Albert introduced Michael and William to the meeting, the mill owner's daughter shielded her eyes, attracted by the sight of others emerging from the mill. 3 men, walking purposefully, exited the mill yard. All were dressed smartly in fashionable knee-length black coats and neatly pressed trousers. Irene Rose realized they must be mill managers. One she recognized almost immediately, his long, lank, flaxen yellow hair unmistakable, his high cheekbone, pale, skull-like face unforgettable. She'd once seen this man riding furiously astride a slavering white steed, wielding a baton, looking like one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. A shiver travelled down her spine, as if something malevolent and putrid had walked over her grave. A swift intake of breath, and she hissed, "Nathaniel West." Bess Ackroyd's killer was making his way along the side of the square. He and his two companions obviously intent on listening in to the meeting. Irene Rose couldn't help thinking big trouble lay ahead. The mill owner's daughter gazed around calmly at the crowd. It had suddenly turned silent, surprised by her sudden appearance on the tabletop next to Michael, as if she were some genie magically popping out of a bottle. At that precise moment she had no recollection of how she'd arrived there, any more than her husband had, but she clambered up next to him, angry and determined to have her say. As soon as Michael had started speaking, men in the front row of the assembled mill workers had begun to shout him down, using abusive, foul and threatening language. She'd been concentrating on the movements of Nathaniel West at the time. She'd witnessed West nudging his companions and laughing, obviously pleased at the workman's heckling and Michael's plight. At that moment Bess Ackroyd's last words came to her, as clear in her head as if her friend stood next to her, whispering them directly into her ear. "Tell Daniel I loves him, Rose. They've killed me, and they've killed me new babby. Don't let 'em." She now looked straight ahead at the assembled crowd, concentrating on one particular woman's face, gathering her thoughts, wondering how to begin. "Who art thee, little lady?" The man's sarcastic and patronizing question finally broke the silence. "My name's Rose, Irene Rose O'Donnell," she responded instinctively, a voice sharp and clear. "I'm a mill owner's daughter." "A mill owner's daughter? Thou art speaking to wrang meeting, missus," he replied, much to his colleague's amusement. Rose smiled, her confidence growing despite, or maybe because, of the interruption. "I'm a mill owner's daughter, and I'm here to tell you you're being misled. There's not a real man amongst you if you're willing to accept wage cuts. There's no need. This mill makes huge profits. If you accept a wage reduction this week, your masters will be back for more next week." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I also notice the vast majority here tonight are women, and yet not one woman has spoken. Why's that?" The front row of men seemed taken by surprise, not least by the last question. Silence reigned once more, as if they'd lost their voice, interrupted only by a soft, low murmur of women. "Get off with you! Back to your kitchen, woman!" a lone man's voice shouted, followed by men's laughter. "Let the women speak," Irene Rose demanded, not to be put off. "They're the ones who make ends meet, put food on the table, feed and clothe the children, wait on you men like domestic slaves. Let them have their say. Why are you so afraid to allow them to do so?" "Making decisions is man's work, missus. Begone afore we make you go. Aye, get out here whilst they may, lady. You're a comely lass. Your place is on your back in bed, hasn't a getting a man to satisfy you." A growl of men's voices arose in support of the hecklers, the front row's anger clearly growing, their patience running out and their mood turning ugly. But then another voice, a woman's voice, rang out. "Let us speak, Jem Clegg, or be God you'll be making your own tea tonight." A gentle swell of amused laughter flowed through the women's ranks, only to be answered by more angry shouts and muttered oaths from the men in the front row. They evidently intended to build up a squall. Irene Rose drew breath, ready to speak again, when the ranks of women began to part, as one of their own made their way through to the front, a woman in a black shawl and ragged patched dress, with a child in her arms, finally broke through the front rank of men and turned to face her fellows. She drew herself up to her full height, a determined expression flushing the pale grey skin pallor of her face, her bright dark eyes sparkling. "Shame on you," she glowered. Her eyes swept across the row of men with a look of scorn. "The lass's right. Call yourselves men. I'm telling you now you're nowt but a great middin, a shit tip, a useless toady and mill owner's rabble. Let the lass speak out, 'cause I for one want to hear what she has to say, and so does rest of us women. We hear more than enough of your senseless boasting and hot air at home." "You're right, Betty Dunn," another shouted encouragement. "You tell 'em, lass." More women began to voice their agreement, quietly at first, but then stronger and more forcefully, their words of approval and solidarity building and breaking like waves whipped up by a gale, driven foaming onto a pebbled beach at the turn of the tide. Yet another man opened his mouth to make a clever remark. The diminutive mill operative turned on him quick as a flash. "Dunna say a word, Jack Dunn. I'm warning you right now. If you don't keep quiet, you'll be missing more than your victuals when you wake up in my bed in the morning." She shook her head theatrically. "I'll have sewing scissors to your little bag of sweetbreads in neat. That's no threat, Jack, but a solemn promise as sure as I made mistake of marrying you, to me eternal regret, frustration and shame." A tremendous roar of laughter greeted this statement of intent, some of the men now joining in with the women. Jack Dunn flushed bright red at his spouse's threat, wishing, far too late, he kept his big mouth shut. Judging by the low subdued mutterings emanating from the row of men, most were now beginning to understand the message. The women were clearly not happy. The mill managers had evidently opened Pandora's box. A dozen more spinners broke through the front rank, determined to speak out. Irene Rose noticed some of the men begin to slink away, looking sheepish. Husbands probably, she thought, allowing herself a smile. "I don't know about rest of you," one of the women yelled to the crowd, "but I'm for standing up on my hind legs and joining union. If our menfolk willna stand up for us, we'll have to stand up for ourselves." "Aye, I reckon we should declare holiday until mill owners say sense," one of her comrades added. "It may take some time for 'em to find any," another pointed out. "Us maybe in for long haul, but I dare say we'll manage. Nowt wrong wi' month o' Sundays. If times aren't so hard, let our skinflints take cutting profits afore they make us and our childers clem. They can afford it, we canna. We're on starvation diet already." "Art thou with us or again us?" yet another shouted. The crowd responded with enthusiasm. "With you, all way. Will you read, Maud Atcliffe? We are all with you. Holiday tes, met masters clem." Mighty roars of approval greeted each defiant answer, as the angered women loudly vented their determination to resist their masters' demands and defy their faint-hearted and cowardly menfolk's wishes. Michael O'Donnell, not quite believing this turn of events, put his arms around Irene Rose's shoulders, as the cry for a turnout was taken up and echoed again and again. Irene Rose glanced across to the side of the jostling crowd. West and his companions had disappeared, vanished into thin air like apparitions, as if they'd never been there. "I never managed to say what I wanted to say, Michael. I've let myself down. I'll never forgive myself." Irene Rose sighed with more than a touch of despondency. Her husband laughed and shook his head, lost for words, wondering how he was going to explain the story to Matthew Ethrow, Daniel Donovan, or anybody else for that matter, and make it sound in any way plausible. "You said just about enough, I reckons, missus," Albert Ashton replied with a grin. "Let me buy you all a drink. I thought we might make a few members tonight, if us were lucky. But I'd a bet good money as 'ud never a getten a vote for a turnout. You made all difference, lass, and that's a fact." He watched Michael jump off the table, turn and swing Irene Rose joyfully and safely to the ground. Then he led the way into the little doffer, his arm around the bemused William Doyle's shoulder, and a huge smile on his freckled face. "Fancy a mill owner's doubt of doing that," he said as he marched to the bar. "Pincher's our bill. I think I must be dreaming, old friend."